Welcome to the Explainer. If you've ever just sat and spun a globe or stared at a world map, you're immediately hit with this crazy patchwork of bright colors and bold lines. Red, blue, green, it's all clearly defining where one nation ends and another begins. But here's the really fascinating thing. If you look down at Earth from space, you won't see a single border. No way. Just oceans, forests, and clouds. Those lines on the map, they're completely human inventions, things we've literally fought over for centuries. So today, we're doing something a little different. We're undertaking a massive chronological thought experiment based on our source material to ask a very simple but totally mind-bending question about those imaginary lines.
Okay, let's dive into this. What if the concept of a country just disappeared overnight? Imagine waking up tomorrow to a world with absolutely no presidents, no passports, no national flags, and zero customs checkpoints. Just 8 billion human beings sharing a single undivided planet. Now, at first glance, I know, this sounds like the ultimate utopian dream, right? A beautiful vision of absolute global peace and freedom. But as we start to peel back the layers of how our modern world actually functions, this beautiful dream quickly reveals some hidden and, honestly, massive logistical nightmares. To really grasp this whiplash, let's just look at the first 24 hours. In hour 1, we'd see some incredibly beautiful scenes. Armed guards stepping down, gates swinging wide open, and families who have been separated by political lines for generations finally just walking across and hugging each other. It'd be amazing. But by hour 12, the chaos begins. Commercial airplanes and massive ocean cargo ships rely entirely on international agreements, national air traffic control, and registered flags. Without those frameworks, flights are grounded out of sheer safety concerns, and captains are literally dropping anchor in the middle of the ocean. And it gets worse. By hour 24, as the markets realize the nations that actually back our money no longer exist, global stock exchanges would absolutely panic, shutting down completely.
And that brings us directly to your wallet. Modern fiat money, whether we're talking about the US dollar, the euro, the yen, it's directly tied to the stability and authority of the government that issues it. So if those governments vanish overnight, the paper money sitting in your pocket and those digital numbers in your bank account, they are instantly worthless. To survive, people would immediately pivot to tangible goods. Everyday survival items, think food, fuel, medicine, alongside precious metals and decentralized cryptocurrencies. Those would become the single most valuable currencies on Earth.
Let's move along and see how this builds, because this localized panic quickly turns into a much larger crisis over the first few months. We rarely think about the systems keeping our cities alive, right? But they are incredibly fragile. It's essentially a giant cascading chain reaction. Without governments, currency fails. And when currency fails, the millions of truck drivers who transport food across our vast highway networks, well, they have absolutely zero incentive to keep driving. So fuel stations run dry, and within a matter of weeks, the massive supermarkets in major cities would be entirely empty. This would lead to severe food shortages, forcing people to rely entirely on local community gardens and urban farming just to scrape by.
And it's not just food either. Public utilities would suffer the exact same fate. Power grids might not care about borders, but they definitely require a constant supply of fuel, ongoing maintenance, and skilled workers. If workers aren't getting paid, and coal or natural gas shipments suddenly halt, entire regions would quickly plunge into darkness. And water treatment plants? They're just as vulnerable. They require specific chemicals like chlorine, shipped from specialized factories super far away. Without those shipments, your tap water basically becomes toxic.
So without federal courts, without police forces, and without prison systems, we face a pretty stark breakdown of law and order. How do communities even respond to that? Well, history suggests society would likely split in two completely different directions. In many places, people would peacefully organize. Neighborhoods would form local watches and democratic committees to protect their homes and businesses. Which sounds great, right? However, other areas might fall under the control of those who wield violence. We're talking local warlords, armed gangs, or heavily armed private security firms. The harsh reality is the wealthy could buy protection, while the vulnerable would be left entirely to fend for themselves.
Meanwhile, the physical map of where humans actually live would shift dramatically. Right now, millions of people are essentially trapped in hot, dry, or sinking equatorial regions due to strict immigration laws and border walls. Without those barriers, we would instantly witness the largest migration in human history. Millions would move northward and southward toward temperate zones, places like Canada, Scandinavia, Siberia, regions that have abundant fresh water and fertile land. This sudden, massive influx would instantly transform these areas into deeply multicultural global hubs.
But wait, how does the Earth itself fare in this scenario? It actually presents a massive environmental paradox. On one hand, we could finally tackle climate change as a united global ecosystem, right? No more nations arguing over who pays for what. But on the other hand, we face what's called the tragedy of the commons. That's when individuals act in self-interest and deplete a shared resource. Because without national laws enforcing regulations, what's stopping a private corporation from just clear-cutting an entire forest? Or a massive fleet from overfishing the oceans until they are completely empty? Without community-enforced rules, our shared natural resources could be rapidly and permanently depleted.
Now, humans are inherently social creatures. We really don't tolerate prolonged chaos. Eventually, we would organize and rebuild society from the ground up. According to the source material, there are three primary frameworks humanity would most likely adopt to replace the traditional nation-state. Those are the hyperlocal world, corporate feudalism, or united global government.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how objectively we can weigh these three very different futures. In a hyperlocal world, think eco-communes and city-states, you get incredible direct democracy, but it's nearly impossible to fund massive global projects like space exploration. Then there's corporate feudalism, where megacorporations just run everything. You'd get highly efficient infrastructure, sure, but human rights would definitely take a backseat to shareholder profit. Finally, a united global government. This could fairly distribute resources across the entire planet, but it would be an absolute administrative, bureaucratic nightmare. And the scariest part, if it turns tyrannical, there is literally nowhere else on Earth to escape to.
Let's zoom in on that middle scenario for just a second, corporate feudalism. Because governments are currently the only entities powerful enough to regulate giant multinational corporations, their disappearance leaves a huge power vacuum. Imagine a world where your traditional citizenship is completely replaced by a terms of service agreement. A massive tech or energy company could provide you with electricity, clean water, healthcare, and security, all in exchange for your labor or your personal data. And if you violate their rules, you are deported, you're just evicted, and your access to basic utilities is simply turned off.
Now, one of the most frequently cited benefits of erasing borders is the end of international war. Without rival nations, there are no national armies to clash over territory, and the trillions of dollars we spend on defense budgets could theoretically be used to cure diseases and explore the stars. Which sounds amazing, but let's be super clear here. While large-scale international war would cease, human conflict absolutely would not. Violence would merely shift shape. It would evolve into localized urban guerrilla warfare over basic resources like water, or clashes between workers and those powerful megacorporations.
And that shift in conflict leads us to perhaps the most chilling question of this entire thought experiment. If national governments dissolve today, who takes control of the world's nuclear weapons tomorrow? Keeping massive arsenals of biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons out of the hands of radical groups, criminal organizations, or ambitious warlords, well, that would instantly become the single most urgent and frankly terrifying task facing a suddenly borderless humanity.
When it comes to human progress, the removal of borders offers a really similar double-edged sword. On one side, we have this beautiful potential for entirely open global collaboration. Scientists could freely share data to cure diseases and restore the climate, and education could focus on our shared history as a single human species. But the harsh reality is that multi-billion-dollar endeavors, like launching space telescopes or building particle accelerators, they rely almost entirely on the massive tax pools of wealthy national governments. Without them, basic science might really struggle to find funding, unless, of course, it proves commercially profitable to a corporation.
So the crucial point is that this thought experiment really forces us to weigh two extreme realities. On one hand, we have these utopian promises, the ultimate freedom to move anywhere, united global action on climate change, and a deeply shared human identity that completely transcends flags. But directly opposing that are the dystopian threats, the immediate collapse of our food and water infrastructure, the rise of violent warlords, and the looming shadow of corporate tyranny.
As our sources conclude, our modern system of countries and borders is absolutely flawed. No question. It creates inequality, it restricts freedom, and it fuels devastating conflicts. But it also acts as the essential scaffolding of our global civilization. It gives us laws, it organizes our utilities, and it manages our resources. If you enthusiastically pull down the scaffolding overnight, the entire house is probably going to collapse right around you.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound thought to ponder. As we look to the future, perhaps the goal isn't to violently erase our borders overnight, but rather to gradually make them less relevant through global cooperation and shared understanding. It forces us to ask, will we eventually outgrow these imaginary lines and learn to cooperate as a single human family on the small blue planet? Or, paradoxically, are the lines that divide us exactly what we need to survive together?
Please like and subscribe.